GenAIP.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Bold Inventors Show. I'm your host, JD Houvener. Running solo today, Christmas Eve. I'm excited to be here with all of you. We're here for a double feature, hopefully. I've been speaking with a couple of our guests we had to reschedule from earlier this month that are here today. So backstage, we've got Ram Bulusu, AI pioneer, innovator to the stars. So excited to have him on in just a little bit. As you guys know, if you watch the show, I'm a patent attorney, and I love to talk about inventions and patent law. And when Matt's here, we talk trademarks as well. Matt's on vacation, a holiday trip with his family. We're sharing legal information, learn about the laws, not about your specific situation. So even though you may have a confidential issue, I'm going to have to encourage you to schedule some time to do a free discovery call and speak with us in confidence. We're, of course, live across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you're watching this after the fact and you want to hop on a live show, it's noon Pacific every Wednesday. So we're here most every week here with you live on Wednesday. So come with your questions. We'll put you to the top of the list. Let's see if I had any questions on the week. And we'll wait for our guest as well. We've been going through a lot of questions lately. And usually the holiday week is quieter. So there were a few. Amen. Okay, here we go. I'll put the live weekly link here too. So we're not missing the disclaimer. Here's our legal notice for the week. So I'm not your attorney unless you're a current client. I'm not going to give any legal advice today. Just sharing information about intellectual property, patents. I see a couple live viewers out there. Good to see you. Pop the question in there below. I'll get to you first. Put you to the front of the line, if you will. So here's a question that came out of Cora this week. I'm going to try to get through 4 questions, and then we'll get to our guest. I see Ram backstage, so I'm excited to have him on. All right, here we go. Since public funds bear the greatest risk in the early stages of research and development, should public policy mandate the inclusion of price-linked or profit-sharing clauses in patent transfer contracts? Ooh, good question. I like this one. This may be like an attorney out there asking. While I have definitely been aware of contracts, I am actually not a contract attorney. So my experience in drafting transfer contracts is limited. For those who may not know, a patent transfer contract is really where you're transferring some or all the rights related to a patent. And for utility patents, you, as the patent owner, have the ability to exclude anyone else from making, using, selling, or importing your product to the US. And so those are things you can license or transfer, meaning assign, sell to another party. So this is talking about a public mandate regarding price linking or profit sharing. And I suppose where this is going, I think this is generally there is a policy against monopolies, okay, and price fixing. And when in the world of patents, there is a legal limited monopoly. You're able to do all 4 of those things I mentioned without, having to be against the law. In other words, you're not violating any policies or laws by having a patent. But if you also include fixing the price for a certain product or industry, that could lead toward violating what's called the Sherman Act, and it could be construed to be illegal. And so there's certain laws around where you're going to be forcing a market related to products. So it's more about the invention and the claimed product, and not so much about what's the word? I think it is where you're, let's see, Sherman Act. Help me out here. Anti-competitive, price fixing. What's the word I'm looking for? Yeah. Well, antitrust. Boom. Gosh, that took a bit. It is a holiday week. Antitrust. So don't run afoul of those rules. And so I would say no. I would say there's no reason to include those in the contract because it's already restating the policy of the law. Okay, next question. That was a doozy. If you're watching live, you can plug in any question, comment, and I'll get to you first. I'm just going through a list of questions here as we kind of get started here on this weekly Bold Inventor show. Okay, another question that came in is from Reddit. It says, if I sell furniture and Bed Bath & Beyond sells a recliner chair called, let's say, Wilmot, that blocks me from registering Wilmot with the USPTO, will that block me? Also, even if registered, could cause serious issues in the future. Okay, well, if you sell furniture and they have registered a recliner or a line of products under Wilmot, and they were the first one to use it in commerce, likely they're going to have prior use. And trademark law, if Matt was here, he would reiterate that is what it's going to be, where the rights will hold and vest in the first user. Now, you can go through the motions of filing a trademark and getting it registered, but that's still subject to the first in use. So if you got a similar sounding name or the same exact name and you're in the same industry, furniture, for example, that's going to be a conflict, right? The whole premise behind trademark law is to prevent confusion. Wherever there might be confusion, if you're selling a product, Wilmot, Wilmot, recliner, and there's a Wilmot, mattress or sofa bed that's well known and been selling before you, your product will likely be confusing to customers that purchase sofa beds on the existing. So if there's any potential for confusion in the market, that's when trademark issues come up. So get a hold of us at Bold Patents and schedule a meeting with Matt if you have questions about trademarks. All right, let's take a peek here. This is our last one we'll do today. This is another question from our Reddit group. And then we'll bring on Ram Bulusu. We'll see, he has some issues with his video, so hopefully we can have him on soon. Okay. Hi, a quick question about what it means to be on a patent versus owning a patent. What does being named on a patent mean? And what does it mean to own a patent? Lots of questions there. Let's take those in turn. So be on a patent usually this means being named as an inventor. So you can have any number of inventors that swear an oath and sign a declaration saying, yes, I invented at least one claim on this patent. And they're going to be able to be listed on the patent. And as an individual inventor, each inventor has the ability to fully exploit, in other words, make money with, go to market with, share in the benefits of excluding others from practicing the claimed invention. Now, owning a patent has to do with assignment. So if any one of those inventors, or if they all agree to say, hey, we're all going to assign, transfer, or sell our rights to another entity, typically it's a business. Oftentimes this will happen where you have a startup, multiple inventors are named, and they decide to start up a company. They will assign. They will give up their rights to the invention to XYZ LLC or XYZ Corporation. So that's what owning a patent is. Hope that helps a lot. And typically, I'll say the last thing, if you want to look up to see whether a patent is owned individually by inventors or if it's owned by a company, there is a license. So you can look up assignment, recording. You can go to the USPTO patent assignment recording office and go look up an entity, look up a patent to see if there's any recorded ownership transfers, much like you might see for property, real estate, title, and that type of thing. All right, without further ado, let's bring on our guest. So we have some live viewers, and we've got Ram. Welcome to the Bold Inventors Show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Hey, all right. Well, I'm so glad you're able to join us on the holiday week. How's your week going?
Busy, hectic as always.
Yeah. Well, you made time for us and our viewers, our listeners out there, so thank you. I'd love to just sort of have you introduce yourself, if you don't mind. Give us a bit of your background and what has led you to kind of where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a chemical engineer by education and spent my entire 36-year career in healthcare across different parts of healthcare, payers, providers, hospital systems, medical device, pharmaceutical, gene therapy. And my role has always been in technology, in terms of bringing in the latest technology to be able to improve patient care, get the most innovative drugs and medical devices to patients faster, cheaper, better globally. It's been a privilege to be in this industry. In terms of AI and ML, gosh, I've been using traditional AI and ML for about 30 plus years, but that's the traditional AI. About 3 years ago, when generative AI came around, that really supercharged everything.
Yeah.
Because healthcare, for whatever reason, is always behind in technology compared to other industries, whether because of regulations or other reasons. And so when generative AI came around, when along with my peer groups, when I looked at what's possible, we found there's a high degree of inefficiency and opportunity for improvement in healthcare using generative AI. So it's become a fantastic mission. And most recently, I came on board literally a few weeks ago with an organization called Elara, which is one of the nation's largest provider of patient services for home-based patients. And although I'm here on my own behalf today, immediately before coming here, I spent about a year in the consulting world, working with healthcare companies to bring in GenAI tools. And so what really, for me, is very relevant to my background is GenAI tools are very new, whether it's the big guys like Microsoft and Google creating new versions of GenAI models that are evolving every day, or the smaller startups with very innovative tools, but maybe not really proven yet. In the healthcare space, when it comes to patient impacting decisions, there's very little GenAI capability that's been proven. So on the one hand, there's a big risk. What happens if we make a mistake? Will the patient be injured? On the other hand, if we hold back, will patient care be delayed or denied? And so I think it's exciting to be here, but just at the very beginning of the GenAI revolution. And in healthcare, we don't want to be the first adopters. We want to let less risky areas like marketing and sales and retail take on the GenAI tools first, hone them, and then customize them for the healthcare space. So that's what I'm doing now. And I got to tell you, with generative AI coming in the last three and a half years have been so exciting because I've never seen a faster pace of adoption of technology across any industry.
Yeah.
It's faster than the internet. So it's great to be in this position.
Absolutely. Agreed. Well, it's glad to hear you're also optimistic about it, but it sounds like you're becoming more aware of the fact that there's been a lot of struggle to get true implementations that work, do what they say they're going to do. In this time, maybe you could speak to maybe one or two things you've seen that have worked, maybe some examples of maybe if you're able to share maybe solutions you've come up with or that you've been a part of that have been really nice, maybe foundational pieces that have worked. Is there some light at the tunnel, or is it all still work to be done?
Yeah, so here's how I'd approach that, right? If I look at the last 3.5 years, I've developed about 4 generative AI roadmaps for different kinds of healthcare companies. Big picture, gene therapy companies, smaller contract research organizations, drug discovery in the neuro space, and certainly the patient care space. If I look at the roadmap, I'll lay out what the roadmaps look like and what I was able to achieve in each of those roadmaps and where perhaps we couldn't achieve much. Many people talk about healthcare leaders saying, we're going to cure cancer in 2 or 3 years using GenAI. Well, that's not happening. So when I put the roadmaps together, they're typically 5-point roadmaps for GenAI. We want to use GenAI to, number one, automate manual repetitive tasks across any function in healthcare. It could be patient-facing, it could be finance, it could be accounting, it could be billing. So automating repetitive manual processes is goal number 1. Goal number 2 is reducing errors. And when you automate tasks, the tendency to have lesser human errors amplified. The third one is a business-focused goal, which is reducing cost per unit operation. Goal number 4 is the dreaded reduction in labor and headcount, which will follow. Unfortunately, that's reality. And what we do is we take the savings from these 4 steps and then put that into innovating new products and services and scaling our business. So if you look at that, the first goal, I was able to achieve quite a bit of success. So for instance, in one example, 2.5 years ago, I was working with a gene therapy company where we had a large quality control department. And what did these people do? Expensive $250,000 a year statisticians with PhDs They would take a lot of data about the gene therapy itself, the drug itself, and they would estimate the shelf life, both of the raw materials and of the final injectable product, and they would put expiration dates on your product. And so pretty straightforward shelf life estimation. Problem was, when I looked at what these folks are doing, we had about 6 people in one department. Okay, so 6 QC scientists, $1.5 million together, salary for 6 people plus benefits. Very smart people. They would spend all day analyzing Excel data, Microsoft Excel data, to determine the best expiration date with some error margins built in. Because it's not like a bag of flour that's going to expire. When you have genetic material, it's very difficult to. What's the temperature you expose it to, and what happens when you transport all these things. At the end of the day, these statisticians were looking at the Excel data and they were estimating when it would expire. Now, the problem was budgets always come into play, and I was asked to take a look at that space and see what we could do. And what I found out was, because using Microsoft Excel, we were able to attach Microsoft Copilot GenAI to it. And we were able to have Microsoft Copilot do the analysis of the data in the Excel spreadsheets. These are very complex 200,000 item spreadsheets. And Microsoft Copilot would give you a best estimated expiration date per specific conditions. We were able to actually go in and reduce errors by 93% in the data analysis. And sadly, we were able to also cut 2/3 of the staff. We were able to eliminate 4 of the highly paid statisticians, and we brought in a couple of interns. The strange thing is, young people seem to be more familiar with GenAI, perhaps, than some of the old timers. So the good news was that was a success. Now, I was able to replicate that type of process in the finance space for a company last year, where we came in and said, okay, we got a lot of financial planning and analysis folks. Again, what are they doing? They're looking at a lot of Excel spreadsheet data for sales and revenues and so on. Well, how can you automate that? In this case, we used the earlier versions of Gemini, which was a little bit more successful, maybe Gemini version 2, you might call it. And I was able to look at the Excel spreadsheets and, again, reduce the amount of labor it took. So for 1 quarter summary, we were able to reduce the time it took by about 50, 60%, 55%. We were able to, again, reduce the number of staff there. So reducing errors, reducing cost per unit operation, reducing headcount by automating repetitive manual processes, by using GenAI. Those were the 2 successes. And there's a pattern there, because you'd say, what can GenAI do? I've learned the hard way. The best way to interact with generative AI is to treat it like a very smart employee, but who's a brand new employee, who's smart, but doesn't have the business process experience. And then I stepped back and started discovering that in almost any aspect of a professional business, every process follows a structured decision flowchart. People don't make random decisions. Whether it's a doctor analyzing your symptoms to decide what to prescribe to you, or whether it's a quality control analyst looking at data, or if it's a word processing expert checking for spellings, they're all following a particular decision-based flowchart. You take the flowchart and you build that into your GenAI algorithm and train it maybe for 2 to 3 weeks with 200 or 300 examples. And your GenAI tool now knows how to understand your data and come up with relevant outcomes, and you refine it. Using that process, and successes have been really in making a business more efficient, reducing errors, reducing headcount. Where, however, it has not worked is when, for instance, for a hospital system I recently worked with, we found out that there were a shortage of nurses. So we thought, why don't we take the mundane portion of a nurse's time, updating medical charts, doing follow-up calls with patients? Can we automate that by using a virtual calling agent that can call patients on their mobile phone and interact with them as though it were a nurse? That, unfortunately, didn't work, because when you interact with a human patient, the interaction doesn't follow as much as you want it to follow a decision path. Patients can say very different things. You got a patient with diabetes, you want to reach out to them and say, hey, what does your glucose level look like? That's a straightforward question. But the patient says, oh gosh, I feel very dizzy. My left shoulder is in pain. Now, if you're a virtual agent, you won't know what to do. It'll say, please let me put you to a voicemail. That's not good. If you're a nurse, you'll say, wait a second, left hand, shoulder, diabetes, let me get 911 on the call. There may be something wrong with your heart. So when it comes to non-structured interactions, their generative AI is failing.
Yep.
Whereas the structured data flow type of activities, it's been quite successful. Unfortunately, the bad outcome has been that we were able to eliminate some hard headcount.
Right. Yeah. And thank you for those examples. Those really good. Help me kind of understand. So that manual process, right, and where you can find human error reduction. I'm hearing spreadsheets as a common theme. Where there's data, and it's amazing. You mentioned in the 90% error reduction in that one example. So I guess maybe you could speak a little bit to the call it maintenance. So once you do eliminate those roles, I imagine there's some level of management or supervision of the AI tools. They're not on their own agents, right? They're perhaps needing management. Can you speak to how the maintenance looks? With that 1/3 remaining staff, how they are able to do what they did with, I guess it'd be twice as much before or more.
So typically you need each function, each department in a non-tech company like healthcare, right? It's not a tech company. Each department has like a super user of technology. You're going to have people who are more savvy with tech, who can learn tech, and who are super users. So what we do is we get them professional training. So we got them Copilot Pro licenses with Microsoft. We got them standardized training for using GenAI and so forth. But the most important aspect was on the security side. That's really what took a lot of training, because generative AI tools by design are built to learn by accessing vast amounts of information in an unfettered, open manner. You can't do that when you're inside a healthcare setting. You have to treat GenAI like a marble inside a tin can. It can bounce around all it wants, but it's got to stay inside your tin can, inside your boundary. Yep. And so one of the things we had to train our people was there's a tendency where people say, I'm going to download ChatGPT off the internet onto my mobile phone. I'm going to use it to analyze it. So you can't do things like that. You got to go with the licensed version. We also found out, as many of you now know, that every single cybersecurity system in the world today was designed before GenAI came around. So our cybersecurity platforms, despite what the security vendors say, were never designed with GenAI in mind. We already had a couple of examples where bad actors utilized publicly available videos. Let's say you and I are doing this video, and a bad actor could say, let me make a video of Ram and capture his voice and his mannerisms and call in to, say, the Social Security Administration using his voice, call into his doctor's office or his insurance, and abuse and misuse that. That becomes very easy, because if I'm using Microsoft Copilot as a bad actor, and Microsoft Copilot is a tool that a particular healthcare company is using in the example I provided before, your cybersecurity system is not able to tell the difference. And I'm a bad actor in RAM avatar versus here's the original RAM speaking. And that's a danger. So what we had to do was train our remaining people, say, after the headcount reductions, to say, don't download things on your own. Make sure that the version you're using is authorized. We put a little branding on top of it with the company name and said Copilot for this purpose, professional version, etc. And architected the GenAI tool so it only works within the boundary of that particular company and does not go outside. That's a double-edged sword, because if I use the same enclosed GenAI tool for 6 months, it's not going to be any smarter 6 months from now than it was when I started. Whereas the GenAI tool that's running in the public domain gets smarter each time it runs.
Yeah.
So we had to say, okay, every quarter we'll work with the vendor, the Microsofts, the Googles, and bring in their latest tool. But until then, you use the same tool that you have, knowing that it's not getting any smarter. So that's something we had to enforce, because to a customer, a consumer using a GenAI tool, they're not going to worry about what architecture is it running in. It's like I go to Microsoft Word. Okay, it's Microsoft Word. What do I care where it's running? It's on my company's computer. That became a challenge. And to resist also the temptation of, a lot of times, healthcare executives go to various conferences, as do I. We get bombarded with smaller vendors with very innovative products. And so, wow, this is exactly what we're looking for.
Right.
And they want to pilot it and bring it in. And the problem is, yes, they're innovative tools, but a two-person startup does not have the same amount of bandwidth like a Google to test and control the release. And one example I'll give was, 6 months ago, we were dealing with a small vendor for a virtual calling agent, which would be able to call our insurance companies and patients for the initial call. And they had a great tool. They passed our audit, SOC 2 and other things. So okay, this looks good. And we knew they were very small, a small shop, a 2-3% type startup, but they had a great tool. They passed our audit. But when we actually started the work in a pilot model, we found out through our cybersecurity investigation that they were actually putting our data on the laptops of a couple of the employees who were offshore. It frankly scared the heck out of us. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong because these were techies. They were not healthcare people. They're like, it's my laptop. I understand it's your laptop, but you just violated half a dozen agreements and risked patient data. Yeah. So these are things that employees don't think about. So what we typically do is we have an AI champion for the company who will take the responsibility to make sure AI is used within the ethical boundaries of the company, work closely with the cybersecurity team. There's a lot of training that's involved.
Sure.
You've heard of risk, right? I mean, what kind of risks are there with GenAI tools? There's technology risk. Does this tech work? There is a HITL or human in the loop risk, especially for the healthcare space where the Food and Drug Administration tells us you can use generative AI up to the point of patient impacting decisions. But when you come to the patient impacting decisions, stop, have a human in the loop will come and confirm that decision before the patient is impacted positively or negatively. And the third kind of risk is the inference risk. So this is where GenAI is smart because it can infer from your data and give you intelligent output. But the inference capability depends on how well it was trained. So if you look at Gemini 3 today from Google is way smarter than Gemini 1 because rightly or wrongly, Gemini was trained on billions of hours of YouTube videos. Google owns YouTube. So it's got the experience of somebody who's surfed the internet for 10 years and learned how people talk and cues and things like that. Whereas if you look at Grok, Elon Musk's famous Grok tool, very smartly designed, but it has a tendency to give very bizarre answers when you ask it basic questions, not because it's a bad tool, but because it's still being trained. So it's got a very narrow band of information. It's like if you go to somebody who was on a desert island for most of their life and ask them simple questions, the answers they give you are very narrow. Like, what are you talking about? So the inference quality and the inference risk depends on how broadly the GenAI tool was trained, which is why ChatGPT, first out of the door, was able to answer great questions. But today, ChatGPT's learning has leveled off. Microsoft Copilot's learning has leveled off. But Google's learning is going through the roof. So Gemini 3 is so much smarter than Gemini 2 and 1. So the inference risk is also pretty big. Most healthcare companies make a conscious decision to avoid innovative, smaller startups and go with the plodding larger companies. No, they are not very on cutting edge because we know they have a lot of checks and balances on security and infrastructure controls, things like that.
Sure. No, thank you for that. Incredible. Thank you, Ram. I mean, we're the Bold Patent Show. Let's, if we can, take a little time, talk about inventing and patenting in this very high growth area. I know I've heard in the past many times in a lot of these really high growth industries, forget about patents. Let's just go, right? Let's just go to market. I'd love to hear your input as an inventor yourself, as someone involved in inventions. Where are we at now, and what do you see as some really great opportunity for inventing in the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the past year, before I started my current role, I was running my own business, and so I was forced to invent a lot of models and tools because they didn't exist today. So, for instance, as I spoke with my manufacturing colleagues in pharmaceutical, they had said, hey, could we replace supervisors with a very smart camera that can view what an operator is doing on the manufacturing floor and correct them if they're wrong? So basically, we'll train the camera to say, here's where this person's supposed to put a filter, and here's how they're supposed to tighten this widget. And if they're not doing it, how do you talk to them? And so we would train the camera on the actual process, the correct process. You would observe the person on the floor and beep at them and say, hey, wait a second, Bob, you're doing this incorrectly. Here's the procedure you should follow. Now, I thought, okay, pretty straightforward. I can create this. I had a single example in mind for a particular gene therapy manufacturing floor. Imagine my surprise when I got calls from people in the FAA and the TSA from the airport system and said, hey, can you make something like that for cameras for airports? I'm like, okay, I'm not a TSA guy. What can I do for you? So, well, we're running out of people to monitor bad actors coming into the country from international ports of entry. Can you configure your camera to do that? So I work with it. It's a very huge project. You're talking $1 billion. And the government doesn't do anything small. I said, I'm not equipped to take on such a big project. So I gave my ideas out freely at some conferences. Didn't bother to patent it. imagine my surprise when there are two startups coming in doing exactly that. Me personally, more power to them. I'm not competing with them.
Okay.
I live in Silicon Valley, and unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, there's quite a bit of IP, for lack of a better word, IP theft that occurs in Silicon Valley. I was talking to one of the smaller podcast radio stations that podcast news from war-ravaged and weather-ravaged parts of the world, hurricanes and things. So I can't send reporters here because, gosh, they could be injured, etc. So I came up with a model for something called Anchor AI. This would be like a three-dimensional reporter that would pop out of a small 3D device and would interact with the local situation exactly as I would, except the reporter is somewhere in Connecticut or somewhere nice and safe.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I spoke about this, and a couple of venture capital companies talked to me about it, and I said, well, I just put it out as an idea. And again, a startup came up and said, oh, this is a great idea. We started with this. And I think they went trademark and so on. So what's happening is the GenAI concept is pretty wide open. It's like a platform, right? Now, the opportunity to invent is in the verticals. How do you apply that GenAI tool to specific industry instances? And for instance, I was working with, of all places, a hospice-based company about 7 months ago. And so as I did walkthroughs with some of the customers, the descendants of the people who were passing away. So, one lady was pregnant. So, man, my child will never know their grandfather. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice when the gentleman is still alive and take his videos and photos and create a 3D avatar of that person, load it into a humanoid robot, which is pretty easy to get these days. And when the kid grows up, that humanoid robot can interact with the child as though it were their great-grandfather. What if we go one step further and have a little 3D image projector in the mausoleum next to where people are interned, and when descendants go down there, they can press a button and that person pops up and actually interacts with them using similar mannerisms. I thought that'd be great. And again, I don't have time to pursue every one of these ideas. So what I'm finding is the tool that will actually make it work is pretty straightforward. We already have a way to make avatars. Where GenAI comes in is we can feed generative AI thousands of hours of videos and pictures and maybe live recordings of a person when they're still alive, or maybe historical recordings, and then tell it, okay, now take this information and create an avatar, first a 2D avatar on your iPhone that can mimic that person's behavior, who can interact the way they would answer questions and things. Next step, easy to reach out to China. There are millions and millions of humanoid robot ideas up there. They make them pretty cheap. Download this consciousness or avatar into that robot and then put a face on top of it using humanoid skin. Now you got actually, you could have George Washington walking around among us. Yeah. What he thinks of today's America, right?
Well, there wasn't a lot of video back then, right? So that'd be tough, but you could generate it. Right?
Exactly, and that's where I think the opportunity to invent. So what I've done is I've taken the base GenAI concept. They're all running on generative AI. There's nothing special there. How do you apply? So my focus has been applied AI. How do you apply that? Yeah. I know Satya Nadella from Microsoft has talked about creating industry verticals. Yeah. Industrial coding, and I haven't seen it come true. The biggest opportunity for invention is in creating applied possibilities, applied models for specific industries and specific tasks using the same GenAI platform. And then what you'd have to do is you have to go and train that GenAI model to understand whatever model you're trying to create. If it's to mimic a person, if it's to, you could even imagine a robotic boxer. You can just, we have videos of Muhammad Ali, and you look at his, what does that, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, and all these things, and his styles together, and then proportion the humanoid robot to that, and feed his consciousness, and say, okay, how would he have reacted to this particular punch, and so on, and you can actually replicate that. That's just one example. Yeah, that can happen. I mean, you can train in the FAA and TSA example I gave you. You could actually train your GenAI tool to recognize bad actors as they come through your airport system, at least flag them for the next level of security.
Right. Now, so it perhaps comes down to analysis on the business plan. Is it going to make business sense to pursue that particular idea, that particular vertical? And are you, the founder, passionate enough to see it through to reality? It seems like, right? Basically, point in any direction that you're passionate about, and it's possible. Now, in terms of, is it feasible? Is it going to make money? Can you have the impact you want in the world? It sure seems like a wide open currently. It really is in a lot of different areas.
It is. If you want to, if you look at Google, they came up with Gemini as a great platform. Now, that can be applied across the board. The more generic your tool is, the broader the customer base. But the more narrow your tool is, the more narrow the vertical, then you're going to have a focused customer base. And to your point, you have to look at what is the potential. I could say, hey, I'm going to sell this camera that I call NetRay for observing manufacturing operations, and say, okay, if I put a lot of time and money into it, I work with a couple of buddies from NVIDIA and such, and said, here's how you can do it. If I do that, then I'll have to find a small handful of pharmaceutical manufacturers who are willing to try that on. But if instead I say, you know what, I can use this for the FAA or the TSA, okay, now I've got myself $1 or $2 billion potential revenue if I can build this. That means I can get funding and invest in it and so on. But the challenge I'm finding is, if I can think of these ideas, so can 10 other people. And so it really becomes a race, which is why you're seeing a lot of aggressive investment. Right now, I've got venture capitalists calling me and saying, can you come and follow this idea through for us? And what I'm telling them is, I want to do a couple of different things. I can be an incubator, but you're going to find founders where you can take each of my ideas, build them into a small company. I can be a founder for that and help you. But I don't want to go too deep into that one, because there are so many different ideas to pursue.
Yeah.
Ideas are getting stale pretty fast, given especially the wide, you could call it IP theft, that somebody could say, hey, Ram, I was inspired by what you mentioned on that podcast. I'm going to create this tool, and you're going to now have overly focused creations in the same vertical from multiple inventors. And that's when you're going to have competition between, the customer base is small and so on. The other part of it is cybersecurity, right? That's the one that worries me the most. The cybersecurity platforms have not yet caught up with GenAI. So it's a matter of when, not if, that we're going to have massive cybersecurity breaches of healthcare systems and of our cloud environments where all corporate data is stored. Until the cybersecurity foundations start to evolve as fast as GenAI, the real world applications of GenAI need to be pulled back a little bit, or else we're going to end up with multiple breaches.
That's great, Ram. Okay, I hadn't heard much about that. I mean, I've heard quite a bit about how much energy AI is taking, and that is a concern, but I hadn't actually heard it, so clearly about the cybersecurity risk. Talk about energy for a little bit. What have you gotten information wise? What do you really believe yourself about? Are we going to hit a wall? Are we approaching some energy limit or threshold that will become an issue?
So at the grid level, at the national grid level, I think the big companies like Microsoft and Google have already started addressing it. Google's always forward thinking. I think about 2-3 years ago, they started looking at small sized, localized mini nuclear reactors to power large data centers, things like that. But in terms of the corporate networks, so far, we haven't seen that yet, but it's going to start, because if the corporate networks that we look at today, they're all running most things in SaaS, in a SaaS foundation. So whoever's maintaining the SaaS platform, which would be the big cloud providers, your AWS and your Google Cloud and your IBM Cloud, those guys are going to start feeling more pressure on energy, which is why you see them proactively preparing for supplementing the energy grid, both with alternative energy sources. They go to Arizona, set up a big plant because they can use solar energy, things like that. They have their own nuclear ambitions to create focused energy points. But the national grid overall, if you look at 3 to 5 years from now, without additional power being tapped, we're not going to be able to sustain the speed. The individual users may not feel the pain, but the companies that host the data centers, like the CoreWeaves and those guys, they are the ones who are running millions of NVIDIA chips to be able to run all the processing units. In fact, Sam Altman, he said a few months ago, I know you guys want to be polite when you interact with ChatGPT, but every time you say please and thank you to ChatGPT, it's costing me thousands and thousands more of megawatts of energy being consumed. So it's I think somebody once told me that, this was many years ago, when I was maybe 12 years old, somebody told me that if you go into the backyard with your son and you say, hey, Bob, take this ball, throw it up in the air and catch it, blink of an eye. You try building a robot with a computer brain that can do that. It's going to cost you $2 billion, because the amount of processing you do, how far do you throw? How hard do you hold the ball? What does the weather look like? If you look up with the sunshine in your head, how do you estimate exactly where it's going to fall? Those little calculations that our brain can make because of multi-threaded neural network processing, for a computer chip to do that, It takes a $4 trillion company like NVIDIA to come up with that. Along the process, they consume a lot of energy. If you think about it, when you're young, what do? You eat lots of carbs and burritos and pizza. Your brain's burning up a lot of the energy, right? Our brain itself consumes what, 2/3 of the calories we take in every day in carbohydrate. Sometimes, if you ever notice, if you are low on low carb diet, you're foggy and your brain doesn't work. Well, that's because your brain is saying, dude, I need some energy. Imagine an inefficient chip that's running on silicon that is trying to do multi-thread processing. And imagine 4 billion users around the world who want to hit it at the same time.
Yep.
So energy crunch is very real. The bigger companies are preparing for it. The data center companies are the ones who are going to struggle the most. What we're going to see now is crashes of the public cloud infrastructures that we have in place. AWS worries me the most because they're behind in AI. They are entrenched across the board. They were the first to the market. I've not heard one peep out of Amazon saying anything about energy. Google is doing their part, but Google's GCP cloud platform is still pretty minimal in their adoption level. If you look at IBM Cloud, IBM is not that far ahead either. But AWS, I worry about. Most corporate infrastructures run on it.
Yeah.
So they haven't said anything about energy. I think they're going to start running out unless they do some subleasing with GCP or something like that.
That's great. Thank you for your insights there. I guess the last question I wanted to get to, we're talking the law, and we just saw this month, the Trump administration, as the 11th, issued the executive order, ensuring a national policy framework for AI, and sort of in this, very political climate where we've got now states' rights versus national. Have you dug into that? Do you have any opinions, any thoughts around policies, overarching standards, frameworks? And then if you can quickly compare that to the .com, internet era, where there had to have been some standards in place, trying to find similarities.
Yeah, so in fact, this is one I dug into a little bit. And the biggest impact of that legislation is going to be not on users of GenAI tools, but the creators of GenAI tools. The OpenAIs, the Microsofts, the Googles, they have to think about it. Because if you think about the US, at least the way we're structured, we truly are a united bunch of states, and each state is used to being very independent. There are some states that are more free-for-all, cowboy mentality, rush to the edges. Others are very conservative. And that is now going to be replaced by an overarching single executive order that covers at the national level. Okay, that makes sense. I expect it to become something like the Food and Drug Administration rules that apply across all states, for instance, right? But at the same time, the federal government does not have and never had the authority to control what goes on inside a state. The federal government's control typically is on interstate commerce, not on what happens. So the Fed cannot come in and tell Pennsylvania, this is what you're going to do in your districts. Pennsylvania said, no, go away. But what the federal government can say is, if you're going to transport information from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, we're going to put a linchpin control on that for AI. So if there are states that come up to fight, that could become a problem. But I don't see that as too big of an issue, because most of the larger companies that are going to be impacted are in multi-state locations anyway.
Sure.
I'm not worried about that. What I do think about is, if you compare to .com, it took a while after the .com bubble came around for net neutrality to come up. Because what was happening was different websites started implementing their own controls on what can and cannot flow through their particular portals. And so it started to, you have, one might say, more extremist view websites, more liberal view websites, and all these things started coming around. But net neutrality is still not fully real, because you could still go to some part of the web and see some random spouting off about very weird things, like, why is this person being allowed to say this? And the whole free speech, all these things come in. With GenAI, there are legitimate companies that are trying to use GenAI to create things that some would find odd. You've got even Sam Altman, I believe, coming out and saying things about, we're going to use GenAI to create a social or intimate companion for a person. You can pay and buy this avatar. Now, some would say, hey, that works for me. Most of us would say that's not really what we have in mind. So the censorship element of it is going to start coming in. It's not there yet. GenAI is right now a free-for-all. Again, you can go to Grok and ask it various questions. It gives you answers, make you sit back and say, well, who trained this particular? It's sort of like an extremist young person who may have been groomed and developed a particular very focused way of thinking. So hopefully the executive order, which I find very positive, is going to create a standard control across information that can flow throughout our country from state to state. I don't see the states are going to come and protest it, but typically federal laws tend to be where states draw their own inspiration from. So if the federal law say, here's what you should do, then the states try to comply with that. The states can be more stringent, but they cannot be less stringent. So I see it as a positive, but I see that the censorship element is going to be one of the biggest aspects. Because if you write right now, if you go to Google search, it'll say, would you like to see an AI summary? And the AI summaries tend to be of one flavor. So the most interesting thing is, if you go to any GenAI tool or even to Google search with AI and you ask the same question, wait for the answer, ask the same question again in a different window, it'll give you a slightly different flavored answer. Mm-hmm. That's because the GenAI tool is still evolving its thinking. It doesn't have a single answer. If you go to a calculator and type in 2 + 2, it's always going to be 4. But if you go to GenAI and say, do you think J.D. Houvener is a great guy? One might say, yeah, I think so. Otherwise, who's this guy, right? So there's a variability in it, and legislation can't control it. But if the federal government says you must meet these output quality standards, in that situation, you're going to have the tech companies coming in and trying to create some kind of standard in their output. But GenAI works like a random roll of dice. That's how it was programmed. It's going to be a while before it gets standardized. But it'll take care of itself, because I would say at the end of the day, people use the tool if they trust it. Trust depends on consistency, reliability, and openness. So the consistency in GenAI tools is not there yet. Hopefully it'll be driven, but it will take about 18 to 24 months for us to get there.
Yeah. Ram, you're a visionary. You're a visionary. Thank you for sharing your time and wisdom with me and with our audience here. I asked this of all of our guests, would you be willing to share your enter or any contact information if anybody wants to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
All right. Go ahead with an email.
You want me to enter in the chat, or?
I can put it if the Warp 9 one is appropriate.
Yeah, the same email you have for me, ram@warp9ai.net.
Okay. There we go. I'll put that in the comments. Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much. We'll wrap up our show here today. We didn't have any live questions right now, but I bet we will after the fact. And again, Ram, thank you for your time and making this a priority. Enjoy the holidays, and wish all a great year. Have a good, happy New Year.
Thank you. You too. Have a great holiday. Bye now.
All right. Bye-bye. Go big, go bold.
Go big, go bold at boldip.com.